I'll focus on the aspects related to our work on developing uncertainty-aware machine learning models that can help us accelerate the discovery of new electrochemical interfaces, new reaction networks, and predictions of battery cells. So just to set the scene very quickly, I know many of you are in the field. One of the key hypotheses in the work that we're doing and why we're developing these models is that the conventional battery development processes are simply too slow. The sequential and Edisonian approach really won't enable us to develop new battery technologies at the time when it's needed. So if you take the lithium-ion, a traditional 20-year development and discovery process, and that process simply is too long. The time from fundamental discovery to commercial product is too long. So we need to rethink this traditional sequential way of discovering new materials. One initiative in this direction is the BigMap initiative, or the Battery Interface Genome Materials Acceleration Platform, that really is paving the way towards a new paradigm in battery research and discovery. And many of the researchers in Polis and KIT are very actively involved. So in fact, two of our work packages in BigMap are headed by KIT. So Wolfgang Wenzel on work package 3 for multi-scale modeling, and Helge Stein on work package 3 for our AI accelerated materials discovery. But what we're trying to develop here, and what I'll try to introduce very quickly, is really a new infrastructure that's based on AI accelerated methodologies where uncertainty-aware machine learning models play a key role. It's also another aspect that's essential for the work here is data. And I think the next presentation will focus more specifically on data, but it's important for me to stress that we require data from all parts of the discovery cycle. And we have partners from all the way from very fundamental academic research to cell producers spanning all of Europe. But the research hypothesis for the work that I'll present today and for BigMap in general is really, can AI and closed loop materials discovery help us get better materials and interfaces and get them faster? So it's a multi-pronged approach where we integrate simulations, experiments, and machine learning approaches to discover new battery materials and interfaces. And there's sort of three main prongs in this work. You will already have been exposed to some of the work with materials acceleration platforms and autonomous workflows. I will focus primarily on the two other aspects: the ability to design and characterize battery systems and materials, all the way from model systems, very fundamental understanding, up to full battery cells. And a key element in that is the development and utilization of spatial-temporal machine learning models, where uncertainty awareness is key. So just quickly, I'm using examples from KIT for this. On the first part, the AI accelerated closed loop discovery infrastructure. So instead of this linear path that I showed with a battery example for the lithium ion, really the ability to close the loop, let data and materials flow seamlessly through all parts of the discovery cycle, such that you can acquisition, utilize, and share data at any point of the discovery cycle when that data is most needed. And you can have automated autonomous models that predict which experiments to do, that can analyze the data on the fly. And this is really core to the research that we do, the ability to share data across all parts of the discovery cycle. So what you see here is a cell assembly robot from Professor Stein's lab, where a model can be based on some of the deep learning methodologies I'll show a little bit later, predicts which additives to add to the electrolyte, things like this, to optimize and accelerate the discovery process. As promised from the beginning, I won't focus primarily on the activities for the materials acceleration platforms, but I think I have to show one other example also from KIT and Polis, is the work on Finales, and you will hear more about this. It's also, like I mentioned, our work package 10, but the ability to use lab infrastructure, computational techniques, simulational resources asynchronously and at the location where they are available, when they're available, is really key. This multi-tenant approach that Helge Stein or Monika Vogler can tell you much more about and should definitely introduce and present this themselves. But the ability to create a decentralized and asynchronous infrastructure is really the core in accelerating discovery. That and the models that I'll focus on for the rest of the presentation. Because a predictive model is actually not something that's just there. A key focus in our work and the work of other groups also is to take the step from a descriptive model where we're able to understand and help provide understanding of experimental data that's generated to a predictive model where we can proactively suggest new structures, new compositions based on a direct link between structure and composition and functionality, and ultimately also inverse design, so we can design structure and composition for a specific functionality. And this is really key to a lot of the models that we're developing. They need to have predictive power, and for predictions to have, you can say, value, it needs to be sufficiently accurate. And as a very minimum, we need to know when the model doesn't know. And that's a core concept in the development of new models. Another key element is the challenges across scales. So we are essentially dealing with an optimization challenge that spans from the atomic time and length scales all the way up to the time and spatial scales of a device. And like Wolfgang Wenzel and others will tell you, Arnold Flatz, many others, Axel himself, there is no model that spans all of these at once. What we are trying primarily to do is to take the accuracy obtained at the atomic level and push the time and length scales such that we can get up to the areas where we can address upwards of mesoscopic phenomena, but onset of, let's say, SEI formation, key concepts for the battery development. It's also possible to go the opposite direction. And I won't focus on these examples today, but where you have mesoscopically observable process like dendrite formation, and you can then back calculate down to the fundamental chemistry when you need to change, for instance, an alloying additive or a specific set of parameters that you're optimizing for blocking that specific process from happening. But like I said, a lot of the work in BigMap and in our group at the Technical University of Denmark is really on accelerating the atomic scale simulations. And in BigMap, Kjersti Hermansson from Uppsala University is heading the activities where we're trying to develop reactive force fields, machine learning force fields that can describe real battery electrolytes, organic electrolytes, and the interactions that take place inside the electrolyte, and in particular, as I'll get to towards the end, at the electrode-electrolyte interface. So there are a number of other activities that these types of models can help us understand. For instance, simulated spectra. We can combine DFT level simulations with machine learning simulations and data analysis in general to obtain a prediction automatically from an experimentally observed spectrum. Another key element, and that's the example here on the right-hand side, is the ability to provide information that's hard to abate or hard to obtain, like the formation of the SEI. We can provide insights into the formation processes such that new additives can be tested in silico before tested in the lab. But I'll focus on the first part here, the machine learning potentials and the reactions that take place. And reaction kinetics, the ability to predict chemical reaction networks, is essential for any of these spatial-temporal models that span multiple time and length scales. Because one thing is predicting the energy of a molecule. Another thing is predicting the reaction energy of a molecular reaction. But what we really need to be able to calculate is the reaction kinetics. So we need to be able, with predictive capabilities, to map out all potential chemical reaction networks, so both electrochemical and chemical, so many degradation reactions. That requires that we have sufficiently high certainty on our kinetic barriers as well as our molecular energies. And this can only be obtained through a multi-pronged approach where we combine simulational data from different fidelities or different levels of accuracy with machine learning models and experimental techniques, because this is really the core predictive power on the chemical reaction networks. And one example of this is actually taking quantum chemical data, and there's a widely used data set called QM9 that has about 133,000 different small molecules. But we've also trained in the group of Agir Bohomik here at DTU, another force field that allows us, another data set that uses different fidelities, so different qualities of density functional calculations, and using those different fidelities to identify what is sort of the main source of error in the cheap calculators, the cheapest ones that we can use, the baseline methods. We can actually, based on the use of data at different fidelities, create correction schemes, relatively simple correction schemes that gets us the same accuracy as we have from standard DFT calculations at higher level. And this is one simple way of doing it, correcting the data by using or training on the delta of a low fidelity and a high fidelity method. The uncertainty awareness or uncertainty quantification for any of the machine learning models that you will hear more about actually requires that you understand what kind of uncertainty it is that you're facing with. Is it so-called aleatoric uncertainty or the inherent noise in the data that you have? I mean, if it's a low fidelity method, it's a large. If it's a smaller noise and it's from a higher fidelity method, it can also vary over your distribution, such that at certain times you have a much larger uncertainty. Or it can be what we call epistemic uncertainty, where it's the model itself that can be reduced either by having a better model or by adding more data. So the ability to distinguish these two is key. And this is work from Jonas Busk in particular, who's developed an ensemble method that allows us to quantify the uncertainty and quantify the aleatoric and the epistemic uncertainty. So knowing whether it makes sense to add more data, to add different kind of data, less noisy data. So we are able to learn on the fly what the model needs or what developments the model needs. So this is a message passing neural network that has been applied here on an ensemble of message passing neural networks. The key, like I said, is not just the molecular energies or the reaction energies, it's actually the kinetic barriers. And predicting reaction rates with a machine learned potential is by no means a simple task. So Matthias Schreiner and Ole Winter and colleagues also at DTU, we have developed a method that also learns what it doesn't know, developed what we call a NeuralNEB, so a path technique that allows us, using machine learning models, to predict transition states. And the error on the prediction of the transition state goes directly into the exponential of the reaction rates. So this is key, minimizing that uncertainty. So here, using equivariant graph neural networks, it has trained on 10,000 elementary reactions from another training set that we generated called Transition 1X. And Transition 1X really does something different compared to all the other data sets out there, that it includes data that's not equilibrium data, not near equilibrium data, but it actually generates structures from the near transition state region. And that's essential for training these models if you want to have predictive power on the reaction rates. So here, 10 million DFT calculations, it gives us a speed of more than a factor of 1,000 of DFT, and it gets us the same accuracy of 0.2 EV on the transition states as we typically would assign to a DFT level calculation. It's just, instead of running it for half a day, we run it in half a minute. The core challenge and where we're moving towards, and I'll just show one or two small examples of that, is really not just the molecular reaction network, but the reactions that take place at the solid electrolyte interface. And here it gets even more challenging to train machine learned models, because you have a huge variation in the inter and intramolecular forces at play in the organic electrolyte, in the electrode, and at the interface. So statistical sampling, the ability to train your models, is key. And there are many different models in play. I won't show all of these models, but there are Gaussian-based methods where, like SOAP, for instance, where Gabor Chani from Cambridge is the original author of that. That's super good at training on certain smaller sets where it's a local information. You have neural networks that also are able to train very well, in particular if it's mainly a local interaction network, but can also include more species, or towards the graph neural networks that allow you also to include a bit of the longer range activity. But different methods have different, you can say, advantages for different challenges. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to develop workflows that allows you to train the right method, and in particular to reduce the, you can say, the uncertainty on the data you have in. So this is one example where it's actually training on an aqueous electrolyte, a liquid solid interface with an aqueous electrolyte. And there you see, for typical ab initio MD simulations, maybe if you're very patient, you can reach a nanosecond, or in this case, 2 nanoseconds of simulational time. But that's not enough for the prediction of SEI formation, for instance. You also need to have sufficiently good statistics that you can predict variations in the absorption or binding energies of species down to fractions of an electron volt. And what we know from standard DFT level methods is that many of these actually have errors on specific chemical bonds that are on the order of 0.1, 0.2, sometimes even a bit larger. So we don't have the predictive power there, but we can use correction schemes like what I showed you before to have a, you can call it curated data set, where we can then train the machine learned potentials such that we are able to access the millisecond, at least the nanosecond, but upwards of the millisecond regime, so we can see the formation of some of the key interfacial species that we are dealing with. And what will we use methods like this for? Well, one thing, and this is also work from a KIT-led work package 3, is that it can help us develop even better models for describing SEI formation. So I hope that people from Arnold Vlach's group will also present here, because there are many excellent approaches. I just picked one here from a collaboration with Politecnico de Torino and KIT and LRCS or Amiens, where they're developing models that also allows us to take, let's say, relatively simple at this point, simple P2D models, but then include much more complex, detailed geometric structures predicted from LRCS that can then tell you how does the morphology of the electrode actually impact the formation of the SEI. So the hope is to get to the point where we can also include the DFT level simulation or the machine learned potentials in these multi-scale simulations combined with the neural network, such that we can actually address the real mesoscopic scale of the electrode and the SEI formation. I will just spend a bit of time on the data aspect, because that is key. The ability to share data from experimental, computational, machine learned models, existing databases, and share the data in an ontologized form. I won't have time to go into the ontology itself, but having a framework that allows you to map seamlessly data from experiments to simulation and use that in a machine readable form is key. And in BigMap in particular, I would take my hat off for Christian Punkt and others for developing, you can say, the data management plan and approaches for sharing data in BigMap, and EPFL in particular, Francois Leo and Nicola Massari, for developing the infrastructure that allows us to share data across partners and across projects. And I won't spend too much time on this, just maybe beg you a bit. The access to data and ontologized data in particular is key for the development of the models that I'm presenting here today. So please, at the end of this, if you have one take-home message, it's share your data. We've created a framework in BigMap for Battery 2030 Plus that Christina Edstrom will talk about later today, where you can share data in a simple form with your project partners. It could be either from the BigMap project or any other project under Battery 2030 Plus, or it could be in Polish, where you can share it in an automated fashion, such that it's easy to upload a data set. So here, this is an example that Francois did. You upload a CSV file. It also uploads a JSON file with the metadata, which is key. You can link it to the specific project that you're working on, add the title. What is this? It's electronic structured data. You can also add the person who produced this data, so you can use it in knowledge graph. And this is the famous scientist Peter von Bigmap that many of you know. You can share this with the community. It can be shared with either just your specific project, in this case, Bigmap, but you can also choose to share it with the broader community. If it's data that you know, this data set, like I showed, the multi-XC training set or the transition 1X, that training set would actually be interesting to other researchers, even before it's made publicly available, for instance, in Materials Cloud, where we typically publish a lot of these. So you can make your data available in ontologized ways as soon as it's generated. And I think that's key. Share your data as soon as you can and use the tools that help you also to make the metadata searchable. I will give a few last examples here towards the end. One is sort of the bridging between experimental workflows and computational workflows. So what you see here is sort of two different approaches to this. So imagine you want to optimize the next generation sodium-ion battery electrodes. We can do a lot of this computationally by automatically setting up structures, different crystal structures, looking up in the ICSD, generating supercells, running the simulations, assess the kinetics with some of the models I just showed you. But it's essential that you can also validate that experimentally. So you need the workflow to be able to launch the experiments, or at least acquisition the experimental data from the database. So creating these automated workflows that bridge both simulations and experiments is key. Another part in the example here on the left is a schematic from Finales, is you can also imagine that data is generated on demand based on the uncertainty quantification, or the uncertainty in your specific experiments performed or simulations performed in your own lab. So the automated workflows is key for this to succeed. I will show a few examples here. One is from Jülich, from Martin Winter's group. It's activities headed by Isidora Sekic-Lackovic, where we're trying to optimize electrolyte formulations. And here are three different examples that at least two, I think actually all three, involve Polish partners on trying to combine experimental data, in this case, high throughput experimental data with machine learned models to accelerate the discovery process. In the first example, it's making a surrogate model, both a Gaussian and a linear regression process, that can much quicker make predictions on what is the conductivity of a specific electrolyte if you change certain parameters. It's much simpler and much faster than doing the actual experiment. So it's a low cost addition or add-on to the experiments that you can weed out the bad suggestions, you could say. The second example, which I'll also go a little bit more into detail with, is related to symbolic regression, actually using generated experimental data. It could also be computational data to deduce the underlying physics or the governing equations, you can say. In this case, taking nearly 1,000 experimental measurements on conductivities, different organic carbonate-based electrolytes, a range of different additives. You can then, by using the you can say the experimental conditions like the temperature, but also the compositions, you can let the models predict what is the right physical model to describe the observed experimental properties. I'll get back to that in 1 second. Another example, and this is with KIT also, is an active learning scheme where you can use the methods to suggest the next experiment to be performed. So this is another way of accelerating the experiments by not doing, you can say, the wrong experiments, or optimizing your efficiency in terms of doing the experiments. But like I said, I will just show that one middle example where you can propose a number of different governing equations for, in this case, for the battery electrolyte, that could then be described with different functional formula. And you can see when are you fitting, when are you overfitting, and you actually get the physical equations out by using the symbolic regression. And fortunately, the discovered expression here also abides the expected physical governing equations, such that we now have a model that's more precise than standard models and is able to describe most of the temperature range in question. You can see that at a low temperature, it's not super efficient. But this is a way where you can also learn parts of the physics. And that's really the next step in what we're trying to do. Explainable models that allows you to get physical or chemical understanding from the data and from the models. And that's where the last example also resides. And this is work by Laura Riga in particular, but many others have also contributed to this, using the uncertainty quantification in combination with, in this case, a deep learning model called LSTM, or long short-term memory model, that allows you to take in cycling data from a number of large cells, large data sets with cells from different chemistries, train a model that can on the fly make an uncertainty-aware prediction of battery end of life. And this is key. It can make it on the fly. So it's not like it has to have 100 cycles or 200 cycles. It actually only needs to do as many cycles as are needed to have a sufficiently low uncertainty on the prediction. And what Laura's model is able to do is to very quickly learn and make predictions on battery end of life by using a very small subset of the cycling data. But then there are certain cells, like the ones here in the middle, the one at the bottom left-hand corner also, where you see the uncertainty is large. And for those, you can cycle longer until you have a sufficiently low uncertainty that you can say either this cell has a 2000 cycle life or less. But you can use the uncertainty to accelerate the testing of your battery cells also. And the last thing that I want to show is that you can actually also use this to learn something about the data that came in. So one thing that Laura's model combined with Jonas' uncertainty quantification is that it actually allows you to differentiate between data from aged and from non-aged battery cells. So this is a way where uncertainty and these adaptive or learning models, LSTM models, allows us to learn parts about the physics that's behind the observed quantities. So with that, I would just like to point you in the direction of our app store from BigMap also, where you can use the tools that we develop, because we are developing externalizable tools. You've seen the tools for the finales here. You've seen the one for the uncertainty quantification, but there are many other interesting workflows, tools, and code base that you can go and address and download yourself. So with that, I would just like to end. I hope I've shown a couple of examples of the ability to accelerate the discovery process itself, but in particular, the importance of knowing when you don't know. The uncertainty awareness, introducing that into the models, is a key step towards accelerating the discovery of new battery materials and chemistries. So with that, I see Axel is standing up. I hope I can hear him also, but I would like to thank the people behind this, and Polis and KIT in particular, for the invitation. Thank you.